Welcome to Yelling Into the Void, a podcast discussing and exploring topics in World of Warcraft. I'm Tevin. I'm joined as always by Scott. And today, tomorrow for us, today for you, the Warcraft series as a whole turns 30.
Oh my God.
Which it may not be significant to a lot of people. I know we've talked about this a lot the last few weeks, but like to put it into perspective for a lot of people, like that constitutes a franchise that started when somebody was potentially like 10 or so, and now they could be 40. Like that's a long time.
Yes, that's me. You've just described me. Although I'm not 40 yet. I have a year left.
It is insane to me. Like this franchise has been going on so long. And like we talked about WoW turning 20 a couple weeks ago, which that in and of itself is impressive. But the Warcraft series as a whole and all of the lore around it, there has been 30 years of iteration. And it's also crazy to think that like some of the original people are still working with the game. Maybe they've taken breaks, but they've came back. But like Metzen is still there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it doesn't happen very often. I mean, there's obviously game franchises that have been going on for a long time, like Final Fantasy has been going on since 90. But that's a little different. It's a little different animal. So yeah, it's kind of wild, actually.
It is definitely something that I think is well, they're having a whole event about it, right? Like they're going to have like announcements and everything else that are going to be happening today, tomorrow for us, today for you.
Yeah, our recording schedule unfortunately landed us like the evening before what is going to be an incredible amount of news, like a BlizzCon level amount of news in the game, and we don't know what it is yet, so we'll talk about it next week. But yeah, I mean that's what I understand is it's like a 45-minute live stream that is similar to like the what's next panel they run at BlizzCon. So there's gonna be some pretty big announcements in Warcraft. Like I think there's hints at just like Warcraft as a real-time strategy game. They're gonna have some pretty big announcements there. There's probably gonna be some WoW announcements. There's gonna be some Hearthstone announcements and some Warcraft Rumble announcements. Everyone's favorite game that I forgot existed until I saw it on the list of things they were announcing. So no, it's gonna be a big deal. I love that they're kind of playing this up. It's fun to celebrate 30 years of something, and I think we're gonna get there's something big that they're announcing tomorrow, and I think it's like Warcraft universe adjacent. I think it might be like another movie or TV show or something. That's what my gut tells me. I'm not 100% sure on that though.
Neat. So I guess while we're talking about it, do you want to jump in and just kind of like think about the things that we're gonna be getting for sure tomorrow?
Sure.
Because like the first thing that comes to mind for me is a season 2 release date announcement.
Yeah, I think
as well as
happen.
Potential dungeon pools for season 2.
I think so, and they might give like a very, very brief glimpse at like an overarching like, because I think part of the season 2 dungeon pools will be like a aesthetic theme for wherever the story is going, because you know how they've been trying, at least with the choice of the old dungeons to bring, they've made them like kind of adjacent to the story a little bit, like with the emergency season, like they brought in Darkheart Thicket, like they try to bring and Everbloom, like they try to bring in dungeons that are kind of thematically similar to what the raid's gonna do. So I would figure with an announcement of what the dungeon pool is going to be, which I think you're right on, I think they will also give us like a general, not very many details, but general, like here's what the raid's going to be, here's the aesthetic. That's what it's. I think it's gonna be nothing more than that. Like I think they're gonna be making some Mythic Plus adjustments in season 2. That's a big prediction of mine as well. I don't think those will be announced tomorrow. I think it will be like, here's a little video we put together of like what the raid zone or what the new zone and the raid in it's gonna look like. Here's the dungeon pool. More changes to come, and I think that's gonna be just about it.
Yeah. So the other thing that I was thinking about too is, you know, we have we know what the new zone is. Like they've already leaked that. We don't know what the raid is. So like you're saying, I think that we'll get an idea on what that's going to
Well,
be.
hold on.
We
We
don't
don't
know what the
actually
new
know what the
dungeons.
new zone is.
Well, the Siren Isles or
Yeah, but
whatever,
that's
right?
not season 2. That's the
Oh yeah, that's 1107.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Fair. So I guess that's completely fair. I was gonna say we've already been kind of like prepped for some of this, and I wouldn't be surprised if they kind of like drip feed us stuff afterwards. That's tend to like in the past, thinking back on it, that's kind of how they do Mythic Plus announcements. Is like they do their like big announcements on around everything, and then they just kind of like a week later they do some Mythic Plus announcements, and then a week after that they do a couple of more Mythic Plus
Yeah.
announcements.
A week later,
So
they just drop a surprise Tuesday afternoon. By the way, we're entirely changing up how Mythic Plus works this season. Here you go, surprise. Yeah, they do like to do that. So yeah, that's on the Warcraft front. I think you're spot on with this. I think a release date, which I'm going to go ahead and say February, and then probably end of February, and then we'll get some information, some cursory information about the zone and the raid and a dungeon pool. Yep, I
sure.
think that's it.
Well, I mean, I think the thing that is interesting to me on this is the fact that this is coming with a whole slew of other announcements. So while we don't have a lot to really predict on that, like you were saying, it might be a TV show or a movie or something like that that might be getting announced, and then there's Warcraft Rumble and everything. Um, I don't really want to go too much into that because I don't know exactly what all that's going to be, but I do think that it's something that I want to talk about next week because it's interesting to see where they're going with the franchises and how they're kind of like trying to tie everything together. So,
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only thing I'll say is I know that like the real time strategy game genre is not having like the best of times right now. I'm trying to think of like what's a very popular current real time strategy game, and I'm
Age
not.
of Empires 2.
I mean, yeah. That how many billion years did Age of Empires 2 come out?
I don't know. There's Age of Empires 3. I don't know if people played as much, but
There's
yeah, I mean, the RTSs that I can think of that people play regularly are like Age of Empires 2, StarCraft 2,
yeah, which are like
Warcraft 3 a little
decades
bit.
old games on their own. So like I'm pretty sure they've announced that they're going to do like a Warcraft 2 Reforged, which hopefully they will do a better job at than they did the Warcraft 3 Reforged. But like there's always been a part of me that's been a little brokenhearted that they decided to go this MMO direction with the Warcraft franchise. I've obviously enjoyed the game for many years, but that we kind of lost the real-time strategy game that Warcraft
Hmm.
was for 3 games. I was always kind of sad about that. There's always part of me that's been like, "Oh, I really wish they do a Warcraft 4." And I know how does that work with the lore of the game? Do they tell 2 stories consecutively, or do they just spin them off and go in different directions? I don't know. That's not my job to figure out. I just would like to see something on the actual Warcraft front outside of WoW. I think that would
Sure.
excite me.
Um, for news though, outside of all of the 30th anniversary Warcraft stuff, we didn't have a ton of news come in last week. I think the most interesting thing for you and I, and this isn't even really news, but is the MDI, which I don't I think I watched less of this week's MDI than I did last week's, which sucks because I was more excited to see what mandatory did. I did see that there was like a record breaking run of like a 7 minute some odd second necrotic wake, which is fucking bonkers.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's about all I've seen of the MDI. Did you have a chance to watch any this weekend?
I watched a little bit more this weekend than I did last weekend. Mandatory won, of course, as we both predicted. Although I will say it was really close. So the finals went down to the last game. It's a best of 5 series. It went down to game 5. It was a Dawnbreaker, I think an 11 Dawnbreaker, and it really came down to I think it was a 6-second differential between the two teams. So like it was the last map down to the wire, to who would win. And granted, like, so the way the people don't know the way the groups work is the top 3 teams get to go to the global finals. So like they had both teams already knew they were moving on. So like they weren't necessarily competing for anything other than maybe seeding in the finals, but they really played hard against each other. It was a really, really close. Like I watched that entire last map, the Dawnbreaker, and it's just really fantastic to see how close these teams are. So I think our worry that, mandatory was just going to like sweep, it was a little unfounded. Now, I will say up until the finals, that was definitely true. Mandatory went 2-0 in the first round, in the quarterfinals, and the semifinals. It was only until the actual finals that holy moly, the team that they played against maybe had figured them out or just played their asses off and made it a competition. So they're still probably the favorite going into global finals, but it was more exciting, I think.
Yeah. So MDI, what was next? I think there's fairly significant Mythic Ansarek nerfs that
Mm-hmm.
came in a couple days ago, maybe even yesterday.
Yeah, I think it was just
Um,
yesterday.
and that is, I don't know. It's cool to see. It's something that you and I like knew this was coming. Nerfs happened the second the world first stopped. But after seeing some guilds prog on this, like I've been watching Yoda stream, and this boss honestly just on Mythic, it doesn't look fun.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like miserable. And I don't think anything encapsulates that more than the tweet that you sent me the other day, where it's like, "Dear Lord, thank you. I appreciate these nerfs. Hopefully, my guild will kill this boss and I can stop playing the game." And it's
Yeah.
like, damn, that's sad.
Well, okay. How far into the season are we now? Because I'm pretty sure the Hall of Fame for this raid is not closed yet. Uh,
No, it's not even close. Last I checked.
yeah, yeah. So like, I feel like that's a problem, right? I don't know. I'm trying to do quick math in my head of when this raid actually came out versus, but it's been a couple months almost. We're now in week 5 of the part where we start getting this stacking buff. We've had 2 instances of it. We'll get another next week. And so this buff is continuing to stack. But like the thing that guilds are struggling with in Ansarek and frankly in Silken Court and in Brew Twister and Princess is not I'm not doing enough damage or I'm not doing enough healing. It's just the mechanics and some of the mechanical overlaps are just very, very punishing. And I will say that the Ansarek nerfs that they did yesterday are seeming to combat that specifically. Like the web blades and the roots and like the timing on the stuff is just very, very unforgiving. Frankly, it was unforgiving on heroic too, but they had nerfed that on
Yeah.
heroic a couple weeks ago. And now they're doing similar nerfs on the mythic side. I don't like, I guess I struggle philosophically with like, is it good that the raids are this hard? As a person who would like to break into Mythic one day, really hasn't done anything. Is it good for the game that this stuff is this hard for this long? And I don't think so.
So here's the problem that I have is the first 4 bosses of this raid are so like laughably easy when it comes to Mythic. Rashanon's a little bit more tricky, but I mean even Rashanon's a kind of a joke. But then you have some of the hardest bosses they've ever created in Silken Court and Ansarek
Yeah,
at the end.
it's definitely not
Which like
linear progression at all, which is a problem in and of itself. But yeah, I mean, I just look at the idea that like when we've talked about this before, the first people that kill this boss are fighting a boss that by the end of the tier is just completely different from what it looks like for the people killing it at the very end. And so what I mean, it is just kind of wild to me that within this one raid and with this one difficulty, there are hundreds of different levels of skill present in the game, all
yeah.
doing the same thing. And it's interesting, like in Mythic Plus, that kind of sorts itself out naturally because it's divided by key. It's not like everyone's struggling against plus 15s. It's like everyone's struggling against keys of different appropriate levels, and the difficulty levels in raid are supposed to do that, right? It's supposed to differentiate skill. Like the people that are the best at the game are doing mythic, the people that are okay at the game are doing heroic, etc., etc., etc. But what actually happens is just the mythic difficulty in and of itself has 10,000 different difficulty level or levels of skill within it. And I just don't know if ultimately like that's a good thing, because like it seems like the game is trying to cater to all those varying levels of skill. And so the determination of how good you are at the game is not, are you clearing it at mythic? It's at what time are you clearing it on mythic?
Yeah.
And that just seems
Yeah.
a little bit broken. Like again, like to date myself, and we're going to be talking today about the early days of MMOs, but like back when these games were first coming out, when this game in particular was first coming out, the difficulty with being a world first raider was not, I mean, the bosses were hard. I don't want to make it seem like the bosses weren't hard, but like it's they were doing those bosses in the first week at a time when they just did not have the gear that the boss was designed to be killed on. Like if the boss is balanced based on the fact that you're going to collect gear throughout the raid and eventually gear up and have enough gear to down the bosses. Like the difficulty with world first raiders was that they didn't have that gear yet and they were finding a way to kill the boss anyway, just brute forcing it with their great skill. That's not really true anymore, because the game has gotten a lot more complicated, and I just don't know if this is a thing that's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And I just feel like, at least of the content creators that I regularly listen to, it just doesn't seem like anyone outside the world first raiders are enjoying the raid process right now.
Yeah. I think that that's like it's more than just the raid. It's Mythic Plus too. I think that a lot of
Yeah.
the end games, in a way, something has happened to where they just like fundamentally have shifted to a point of not being as fun as they used to be. Um, and again, this is all coming from like, you and I's experiences, but also listening to people who play this game an extreme amount of time. So like, there is a chance that this just comes down to the fact that they played the game too much and they're burnt out. So I just want to at least acknowledge that. But yeah, I definitely think that there is something that has shifted where the end game of World of Warcraft, for anybody doing high level content, I will say, I think if you're doing normal and heroic raid and you're doing, tens or so, you're probably not getting quite as hit with this. But I think that there is just like a level of difficulty increase that has happened with the later bosses of Mythic and the later Keystone levels in Mythic Plus that is just really demoralizing to people right now.
But don't you think that's kind of a rock and hard place situation though? Because I agree with you 100%. I also think if they say, okay, we went a bit too far, we got a bit too crazy in a few places, we're going to scale all this stuff back. Next tier, we're going to scale it all back. I think you'd see people saying,
It's too
wow,
easy.
it's too easy now. This is
Yeah.
just way too easy. Keys are free, yada yada yada. The bosses just die. I just feel like that's what's going to happen, and so like I kind of feel for them here when they're trying to judge what they want to do with difficulty. Is like this problem of once you've established a certain level of difficulty, it's so hard to pull back from that. Like you maybe tinker with it a little, you maybe try to time when your nerfs and the type of nerfs, etc. But like to just wholesale like just bring that back, I just don't know if you can ever really do that.
Yeah. I,
And
I definitely think that I would have liked to see something akin to the difficulty of season 3, season 4 of Dragonflight for Mythic Plus, but with the new kind of like level system integrated and everything like that. I think that the plus 12 affix really just kind of threw everything for whack, with this season. But uh, I don't know. I think that if you go overboard and you throw everything in the kitchen sink at something, it's going to be hard for you to know what exactly caused things to not feel that great. And that's kind of what their approach to Mythic Plus was. It wasn't quite an overhaul. Um, and you and I have been saying for probably years at this point that Mythic Plus does need an overhaul.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but it needs to be thoughtful. I think with a lot of the changes that went into Mythic Plus in this season, now that we've gotten to experience for a while, have been okay. People have said they don't like this. we'll address this in this way, and hopefully that's good enough, rather than people say they don't like this. Here are the suggestions that they've provided. Let's try out a couple of these. Um, that I think in and of itself would have made the season maybe feel a little bit better. I don't think that what people were asking when they were asking for changes between like affixes and stuff like that in season 3 and season 4 going into season 1 of The War Within was necessarily crank the difficulty. I think it was just make every week relatively same difficulty
Yeah.
so that we don't have these like quote unquote push weeks.
Well, I mean, and one thing that's interesting to point out is that they have kind of tinkered with the systems of Mythic Plus a lot. Like they've tinkered with affixes, they've tinkered with key levels, they've tinkered with all these things. One thing they haven't really explored, at least from my perspective, is just dungeon design in general. Like one of the constant complaints I see from people at all spectrums of Mythic Plus is that the dungeons have just gotten overly complex. There's too many mobs doing too many things. And I don't want to get back on our kicks versus stops soapbox again. Which by the way, I don't know if you felt this. I feel like we've kind of started to get used to it in a way that it feels less disruptive, and I can kind of predict and control a little bit more now. But anyway, like there's just so much stuff happening, and it's like, so what is fun in this game, and what you want to do, like this kind of push and pull between having fun but challenging players, is like one thing that's absolutely true, I think, is that people really like to pull a bunch of stuff together,
Yeah.
and and because the numbers go really high and there's a lot of stuff and that's a lot of fun. And as we've said in the past, they seem to not like that and not want that. And I'm not saying that like this should be a thing where everyone is doing MDI like pulls where they're pulling like an entire first room into a boss. Like I'm not saying that should be what everyone should get to do. But I think there's like a happy medium between some of the pulls that I saw people do in like Shadowlands, for example, and what we have now, which is that like I'm pulling 2 packs together, maybe 3 if I'm feeling feisty. And that's about it. And so I think there's a middle ground between those two areas. And I think part of getting to that middle ground is really taking a look at mechanics and design of dungeons and saying, how do we want to do this? Is what we have right now good? Is it a good kind of fun kind of challenge, or is it a frustrating, overwhelmed kind of challenge? And I think
Yeah.
in these dungeons, they've definitely started veering towards the latter.
Mhm. Yeah, I man, I don't know. I don't know even what they can really announce that would get me like, "Oh yeah, this is gonna fix Mythic Plus." Because like I think that there's so many things that go into it that I'm gonna be skeptical no matter what they announce. Like they essentially, for the most part, got rid of affixes going into this season. And, I went into that thinking, "Oh, this is amazing." Um, But, after having experienced it, I think that it would be more correct to be a little bit skeptical and kind of see how everything plays out afterwards, rather than just assume that they hit the nail on the head. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I really like the new affixes, and I really like the kiss curse design philosophy of these new affixes. So I think they've done well with these. There's probably a little bit of tinkering they need to do, but I think they've done well with that idea and that design. And I hope they continue to embrace this idea of affixes having both the kiss and the curse thing. But I also I've kind of reversed my mind on this, which is like I just don't think they should go away at any key level, right? I think they should just I think they should just stay, and that like and continue to iterate on them and make them, not completely dominant in the key. um I don't know, I just really I feel like that's the case now. Like we've run some 12s. I think I've timed one. I think you've timed a little bit more than me, but like it does. Do you notice the step up in challenge difficulty? Do you notice that additional 10%? Oh hell yeah, you do. um you also notice that there's no affix, and like I maybe I'm just a hypocrite, but like I'm like, oh, that's kind of a bummer. Like I liked having that huge amount of haste burst every few minutes, or like I really do feel I think they've done such a good job with the bonus effect you get from the affix when you pull it off correctly, that like it does feel like you've got extra powers briefly. And It does kind of suck to lose that. So I don't know. Like, this is why it's so hard to balance this thing, because like I said something else 2 months ago and I'm saying something else now, and they are contradicting each other. But like, I don't know. Sometimes you get into the thing and you try it out and you're like, oh, actually, I kind of liked it the old way. So I don't know.
Hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah, I'm of a little bit of a different opinion. Like I'm perfectly fine with the ethics not being there. The thing that does get me though is the level of difficulty increase that goes into each key level from 11 to 12, because like thinking of it this way, right? To do a 12, you have to have obtained a 12 or gotten into a group with a 12. To learn how to do that dungeon, you likely need to die in that dungeon, which likely means you're not going to time the key, which means now you don't have a 12 to do anymore and you need to do homework keys to get back to the 12.
Hmm.
This is how it's always been in Mythic Plus. But that being said, it is especially different now because it isn't like things are doing moderately more damage when you go up a key level. They are doing significantly more damage from an 11 to a 12.
Yeah.
That's why when you go from like 12 to 13, the jump isn't quite as bad. Like, yeah, sure, you definitely notice it. You're still going up a key level. It's like it was in the past, but it's essentially the same step from a 12 to a 13 that it is from a 9 to a 10.
Yeah.
I guess that's a bad example. A 10 to an 11. But that's kind of my issue is like it puts more of this annoyance on getting over the 12 hump because of the amount of time and repulls and everything else that you need to do just to get the reps and understand what's going on, because of the fact that you then have to go do the homework key to get back to a 12, which might not be the dungeon that you want to do. And yeah, I think that it's just exacerbating the homework key feeling for me. I think that's the main issue I have.
Yeah, I mean, especially like I don't know how your experience with 11s at this point is, but I'm like 633 is my item level now. Um 11s are not hard anymore, really. I mean, like some are a little bit more harder than other, like a necrotic wake is I think always going to be kind of difficult. City threads can be hard. Grim Batol is a fucking I hate that dungeon so much. So those keys are always going to be a little bit harder, but for the most part, 11s are pretty easy. And with the affix change to add the additional 90 seconds, like +2 in those keys is not that hard anymore. And so you get in a
Right.
situation where you're like easily +2ing an 11, which means you have a 13, and then you walk into the 13 and just get your shit kicked in. And like part of the reason, like the reason the system is designed with you get double upgrades is because it's basically the system saying, oh, you're doing so good that you're not just ready for the next level up, you're ready for multiple levels up, you're ready. This it is system saying you did an 11 so efficiently and quickly, you are ready for a 13. And that's not true. That's not true at all. I would recommend everyone, get all 12s maybe before they start climbing past that. I mean, maybe there's some exceptions with some dungeons are just like noticeably easier. Like I think an Arakara 13 is like probably equivalent to like a Grimbatol 16 or something. Like it's just like, or no, the opposite of what I meant. Like you know what I mean? Like just summer is just so much more easier. So that doesn't always work out, but like it just seems to be contrary to what the system was designed to do when you're upgrading these keys, and you're upgrading them to a level of you just getting destroyed.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. I would love to continue to talk about Mythic Plus and everything, but I want to give them time to kind of go over it and revisit what they're going to do in season 2.
Sure.
So, what do you say we table this until they come back with some more discussion
I
on
am
that?
happy to table any Mythic Plus conversation because I love talking about Mythic Plus, and I will always talk about it again. Always.
So, believe it or not, we're still not out of the news section because there is a couple of other things that happened.
I mean, are
World
there?
World first second Firelands has been completed.
Yeah, within like
Uh,
90 minutes of the raid coming out.
yeah, they absolutely made this raid look like a joke, which is super like it's vindicating and also sad at the same time because I think you had a pretty similar experience with Heroic Rag as my guild did. Um,
Yeah.
That boss was not very fun at content. We were both in guilds that very heavily struggled with that boss, I think. And yeah,
Yeah,
see it die
I
in 90
like
minutes is sad.
never saw phase 4, never saw Rag's legs struggled is where my guild was at. Yeah, it's a very difficult fight, and watching them kind of make mincemeat out of it. I mean, like I knew that was always going to happen. I will say, like, there's parts of you is like, is this just average skill has gone up? Is this weak aura? Is it a combination? And I think in a fight like Ragnaros, it was definitely a combination, because like one of the things you saw like the world first Rag guild do when they killed it the first time is there are these I forget what they're called, but basically they're these like seeds that spawn on people, and like the most efficient way to deal with them, because they all spawn an ad from them. So that it's basically like they didn't have swirlies at the time. It's basically like a swirly under you, that will hurt you, so you need to step out of. But it's also going to spawn an ad that's going to then fixate on someone and run to them, so you need to kill them very very quickly. And so basically the best strategy here was to everyone stack up, but then everyone needs to move at the exact same time, like within half a second of each other, perfect movement. And like when you're watching the game in 2010 and you're seeing a guild like perfectly execute that stack and movement every time, you're just completely blown away how it's possible. In 2024, it's just a weak aura that counts down and then plays a sound when you're supposed to move, and that's it. So it doesn't quite require the level of pitch perfect timing that it did before, but still very very impressive to see these people do this.
Mhm. There's also been a couple of things that have came out in the last couple days. Even today, some hot fixes and stuff like that have happened. Balancing changes. I don't think it's anything that's game changing.
No.
Um, but yeah, I mean that's been pretty much the news the last week. It's been PTR for SOD got delayed. Firelands came out and was killed the same day, and then some balancing stuff. Oh, and answering nerfs. Anyways, Scott, you and I were talking about this. We have talked about this in the past. I do want to kind of tie in some of the things that we've already talked today about into this discussion, but I want to take some time to talk about MMOs over the years, specifically WoW. But I definitely think that this discussion is going to bring in other MMOs comparatively or any other way. But I think that it's important to talk about. I mean, this franchise has been going on for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
For 20 years of that, we have had an MMO of this franchise.
Yep.
So I want to talk. I think the first thing to really get us started in this is like, I think it's two pronged. We have like the initial target audience versus the target audience now, and we have game philosophy where this entire series started as an RTS, is switched to an MMORPG, and now it's switched to more of like, for lack of a better terms, it's almost like a single player game with other people in it for the majority of the player base.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so there has been a lot of shifts. And so I think that the game philosophy and the target audience changing has really driven a lot of what we're going to be discussing. So I think that's where we should start. And to kick it off, I am unsure what the initial target audience was for this game. I think that they went into this with the intention. WoW devs played EverQuest, loved the game, and said, we're going to do EverQuest, but remove all of the parts that we hate about it and make it easier.
Yeah.
That is my understanding of how WoW was born.
Yes, it is actually. So one of the things I've been seeing in conversations about WoW Classic is like people not happy with SOD, people wanting like a WoW Classic Redux that really what they want is to capture the unforgiving nature that the original World of Warcraft was. You had to run all over, and it was game was really hard, and you had to group up because you would die otherwise. And I'm listening to this stuff as an old man and going, what the fuck are you people talking about? Like, very important for you kids out there. World of Warcraft was from the jump designed to be a easier version of unforgiving games. It was looking at Dark Age of Camelot. It was looking at EverQuest, and it was saying that shit sucks. We don't want to do it that way. We want to make a game that is more friendly to a larger audience and allows them to join the. So like, it's so funny seeing these people looking back at classic WoW and being like, "Oh, I miss when the game was actually hard and you had to like run uphill both ways and yada." And I was just like, you children have no idea how unforgiving the proto MMO games were before this game came out. You have no idea. So to say that the developers of this game ever were trying to make like an impossible to traverse world, a ridiculously hard, confusing game that is unforgiving, that won't help you or hold you, like this, never the truth. Never the truth. And I will say, I think, despite the fact that it's changed people many, many times over the course of this game, they have essentially stayed true to that general idea for the past 20 years. Now, the reason why the game has changed so much is, in my opinion, gaming has fundamentally changed in the last 20 years. I mean, we'll say the last 30, but also in the last 20 years. And I know
Mhm.
you people have probably heard other people say that before, but I'm probably like the oldest person that's you've ever heard say it. So I know what I'm talking about. I just think the way people approach video games, the way people play video games, the way, especially online games, is just fundamentally different from the way it was before. And I think these people that want, WoW to go back to the glory days of WoW Classic, or even want like a Classic Plus to just be the way WoW used to be, I don't think they understand that that's gone now. And it's not like,
Mm.
I think Classic in and of itself showed that people are just going to approach their nostalgic game experience with the 2024, or I guess 2019 at the time, mindset of, we're going to min max the shit out of this. We're going to do the most efficient thing. Like, that's just how people play these games now. That's just kind of the way it works now. And I don't think there's any way to put that genie back in the bottle. So yeah, I mean, I think the game has fundamentally changed from the way it was. But I think it more followed the trends of the culture than it did really plant flags in declaring what this game is going to be.
So, a question for you, kind of talking about the initial target audience. So, correct in saying that this was initially trying to pull essentially people who liked the Warcraft franchise.
Yeah.
So, that's one. And then the second audience that they were trying to hit is people who enjoyed games like Dark Age of Camelot and EverQuest. Those were like the two main areas in which they were trying to pull people from.
Yeah, and
And
I mean, there were
so,
other ones like Ultima Online, and there were other ones, but yes.
yeah. Now that has shifted because it established itself into, rather than polling new players, it worked to retain players, and then those players would then bring their friends in. And I think that that became their strategy for a very long time. And I think that that worked for a very long time.
Yeah.
And then the game got very complex and a lot of things were happening in it. And it was like, you join the game, you would start playing, and you're like, I have to get how many levels? 120? Are you kidding me? And then people stop playing again. And so then their design and their philosophy, their target audience changed again to then being trying to bring in more new players, trying to target a younger audience, trying to target an older audience too, like a two-pronged approach, because they needed to have enough content that younger people would not get bored, but chill enough content that people who have full-time jobs and children can still play the game. And I think that that's how we gotten into this position that we're in now with the game, where the majority of the content is what I would call quote unquote casual content. It's that somebody who does have a bunch of children and has a full-time job can come home, play a couple hours, feel like they're progressing in it, and then move on. But then we also have just release after release after release, new thing, which kind of caters towards some of the younger audience who might have a lower attention span. I definitely have fallen into that bucket in the past. So I think that that's kind of where the game is now.
Yeah.
I I think that that is honestly for the better. I think that the game is probably growing, if not retaining players now, where before, when it was just trying to cater towards people who had already played the game, it was starting to lose players because nobody could bring their friends in and say, yeah, just get a quick 120 levels and come play with me.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I also kind of like occasionally I'll see like posts on the subreddit or something. It's like finally trying out World of Warcraft. And like I always want to go in there and just be like, why? Like it's not that I don't think this is a great game that I think a lot of people would enjoy, but I just can't imagine just sitting down one day and saying, I'm gonna try this 20-year-old game. Let's go. Let's start fresh. It just seems like I think I don't know if you ever watched this, but the StarCraft 2 streamer Day 9 like
Yep.
recently played World of Warcraft for the first time ever. And he streamed it, and his video of him experiencing WoW for the first time was like one of the most fascinating things I've watched in the last couple of years, because like it's all these things that like even when I returned to the game in Shadowlands, like the barrier for me was a lot easier because I understood the basic systems of the game, and I just had to get an understanding of how exactly they've changed and what new things they've layered on top of that, which was a much like smaller ask than walking into the game the first time. And I do not think the game does a very good job of teaching people how to play it. I do not think so. But I also like don't know how they do that when it has so many systems layered on top of each other. Like sometimes I feel like they're doing the best they can. There's just too much there. And that scares new people off, certainly. So I agree with you. I really don't know. Like there's times when, and I don't know if I've told you this anecdote before, but I'm an auditor in my day job, and one time I had to audit a phone company that was still doing like landlines in, I think this was a few years ago, so this is probably in the early 2010s. But even then, like people were heavily moving away from landlines, and their business strategy as a company was contact the customer as little as possible and hope that they've forgotten that they're paying for a landline. Because if we reach out to them and remind them that they're paying for a landline, they might go, "Oh, I don't need that anymore," and cancel their subscription. And I really feel like like for a while there, and even some today, the strategy in World of Warcraft is we have to just retain the people we have. So we just don't want to piss those people off, and we need to distract them as much as possible, and that's the play. And I don't think I think you're right. I don't think that's a sustainable model, and I think that phone company knows it's probably out of business by now. It was 10 years ago. But I just don't know how they fix those problems. And sometimes, and I don't know if this is always true for me, but sometimes I feel like one of the biggest problems this game has right now is it is trying to simultaneously cater to so many different types of players, hundreds of different types of players that all come to this game for different things. This is a massive game with a plethora of different systems in it and different styles of play and different things you can do. And the game is so big, and it's been so big for so long. It is just trying to make all of those people happy at the same time. And I
Mhm.
understand that from a business perspective. Why would you not want to do that? But it also becomes like, what is the identity of World of Warcraft in 2024? What is its identity? Because I mean, like in the early days, like it was the leveling process, and then like the raiding, like WoW was like the king of raiding. It was doing raids better than any other game at the time. I don't know what the identity of this game today is. I really don't.
Yeah, I think that's a hard question to answer too, because like I think it changes based on who you ask,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
if you have somebody who loves arenas, arenas didn't come out until, was it Wrath BC?
I think it
Oh,
was
BC, right?
TBC. Yeah.
Yeah. So like things like that, I mean, they were fundamental changes in the game that added a new pillar of endgame for people, and then in doing so unintentionally fragmented the player base.
Yeah.
Adding Mythic Plus fragmented people. Like the hardcore players in World of Warcraft before Mythic Plus all did heroic or mythic rating. Well, what heroic up until mop, and then mythic from the last raid of mop onwards. Anyways, like that was the end game. That was what the good PVM players did. They raided,
Yeah.
and that was it. And then they added Mythic Plus, and now you fractioned Raiders and Mythic Plusers into two different categories. Just like when you added Arena and added Battlegrounds, you fractured all of World of Warcraft into PVM and PvP. And it's not to say that you can't do both, you can't enjoy both, but typically people tend to have a preference towards one thing over the other, and they want the game to do that one thing the best that it possibly can.
Right.
And it's impossible to cater towards everybody at the same time while trying to fix one specific thing for each individual player.
Yeah, I mean, how often are we frustrated because it feels like Mythic Plus is being ignored, right? Or at least not getting as much attention as the other areas of the game, and everyone feels that way about their area of the game because because this development team, which is a lot of people, is split in so many different ways. I mean, there's part time when like I think about Mythic Plus and I think of this wonderful system that I love so much. It's the reason I play the game. Like, I'm just like, if this was its own thing, if this was its own game that didn't have to take the things it wanted to accomplish in this thing and also keep them in line with the things that the game's wanting to accomplish over here and over here and over here and over here and over here, like, wouldn't it just be better? Like, and there's times that I think that, and there's also times that I'm like, well, no, like, I love the fact that this game, despite all its changes and everything, is still a world. And you have your one character and you can do these different things with this one character. I still think that's a fun draw of World of Warcraft as an MMORPG in 2024. So like, I feel like I would enjoy WoW less, or if it was just World of Warcraft Mythic Plus, or like, but at the same time, I feel like I would enjoy Mythic Plus more if so.
Yeah.
Like, I'm really torn about this because, like, we briefly played the alpha of that game that's just basically taking Mythic Plus and World of Warcraft and trying to copy it over and just having a game for that. And it was an alpha. It was a little buggy, and it's got a lot of potential. I think that's really cool. Um, but yeah, I mean, it does feel like a lot of the biggest problems we have in Mythic Plus are the places where that system is specifically coming into contact and conflict with the other systems that are trying to do different things. We've talked so much about comp and raid buffs and all these things that in a raid is meant to make sure class representation, but completely breaks down in Mythic. Just the way abilities are balanced between raid, PvP, and M plus, like all these things are constantly in conflict with each other. And I think the game does a pretty good job, all things considered, at trying to maintain all these spinning plates at the same time. But yeah, you just wonder, like, can you spin those plates forever? It just seems unsustainable.
Yeah, I definitely think at some point, people draw the short end of the stick. For a long time, PvPers just didn't get any content updates, didn't get anything that they wanted, didn't get all of this. And then they got something that they had been asking for a while in Solo Shuffle. And then when it released, it was like hour-long queue times and stuff like that. So I definitely think that there are times where this does come down and it does crumble. And I think that's unavoidable. It's the nature of having so many things, like you said, having too many plates spinning at one time. It's not sustainable. Um, and eventually you will drop one. That doesn't mean that you can't pick it back up and start again, which they have done in the past. And commend them for continuing to try once they do realize that they have dropped something, because it is nice to see that they at least at some point will recognize and will attempt to fix whatever is not working correctly. That being said, I want to ask you a question. So WoW, sorry, Warcraft started out as an RTS,
Mm-hmm.
and then EverQuest and all of those other games. I'm just going to refer to all of the like precursor of WoW games essentially as EverQuest. I know there were more, but EverQuest was, I think, by far the biggest. Um, so then EverQuest and all of those games popped up. we've got an MMORPG that was spawned by all of those games, and an MMORPG in the truest sense of the form, where there was things you could not do without grouping. You
Hmm.
had to interact with other players, and now we are in a situation to where the the things at which you have to interact with other people for are so far and few anymore in the game that you essentially just let the game handle all of that for you, and then you get done what you need to get done, and then you move on with your life.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to explain. The way that I've explained this to my friends in the past is I think that modern WoW versus classic WoW is a better game, but a worse MMO RPG.
Oh, yeah. Almost certainly. Um, I and okay. So here's what I think about this. I think the community that sprang up around these games is a result of many, many different things. The first is that the content was very challenging, and you needed to have people that you could interact with to do the content. I think a big thing though, and this is the thing that was true for sure, true in EverQuest. EverQuest was a game that was designed to play on a modem, and so it had to be very slow. It had to be a
Mhm,
very slow game. You could not have like the idea that you would be able to like dodge swirlies on the ground when running on a 56K modem was just not a thing that existed. And so the combat in EverQuest, and even I mean in early WoW, I think this is true as well, that the combat was very slow, very deliberate. A lot if you were a melee, a lot of your damage was coming from white hits. Like if you're a caster, you're casting a spell with like a 5 second cast time. And also just like the way you killed enemies in that game, you did not like traverse, you did not often like traverse through an area killing enemies. You had camps, you had areas, and your group would sit down in the area, and then one person would be responsible for going to pull stuff and bringing it back to your safe area. And what that
mhm,
created was a lot of downtime. And you have a bunch of people needing to group together with a lot of downtime. And so what did they do? They talked. They talked to each other. It was basically a chat room with the veneer of an MMO put over it, or a video game put over it. That's what EverQuest was. And I think the early WoW copied that over. It had people that were used to that kind of play style, used to doing that. And yes, the camping died down, but still the game was a lot slower. Like mana recharged very slowly, so you did have moments where you would have to stop pulling because you needed to sit down and get your and each drink your water, etc. The pace of the game was much slower, and that allowed people to communicate and talk. Now, as netcode got better, as speed of internet got better, they were able to do just more. Your rotations got more complicated. They were able to be more responsive. There was things you could do between global cooldowns, and of course then they became swirlies and things to dodge and mechanics to do and positionals, and all this stuff got more and more complicated. And the thing that happened is there was less downtime. There was more hands constantly on keys clicking. There's just less time to talk to people. Like I see people
mhm.
say like, why does nobody talk to people in dungeons anymore? And I'm just like, when do you want me to do that? At what point do you want me to like stop in the middle of my rotation and say, so what did you guys think of the election? Like what that's not going to happen. And so like it is no one like woke up one day and decided to make the game this. It's just something that happened over time as the game got more complex, as internet speed got faster. It's these things happened over time. And I mean the game facilitated them too, because like the systems were created because it is a pain in the ass to take 2 hours to get a group together to do something. It sucks.
Yep.
And so like that's not fun. And it's like, well, we can make that better. We have a way of solving that problem. And it did solve that problem. It had another that's everything. Like we want combat to be faster. We want it to be more challenging. We want like okay, we can solve that problem. It has an effect. So yes, like this is a very long, long, long way of answering your question, which is like 100% World of Warcraft in 2024 is barely an MMORPG. It is.
Mhm.
And I seriously don't know if an MMORPG like Classic WoW, like EverQuest, can even exist in this day and age. And that level of community that people are nostalgically remembering, I just don't know if it's possible anymore.
Yeah, so I definitely think that they can exist for a period. Like perfect example is when Classic WoW first came out and the droves and droves and droves of people that went and played Classic. But the thing is like the Classic as in of itself was designed with the social part in mind, and people are just not that way anymore when it comes to gaming. And so it has a lifespan, and it's going to run its lifespan, and then it's going to stop. Like people don't really play Classic as much anymore for that exact reason, I think. Which kind of brings me to the next point that I wanted to bring up is in this game, and this is going to directly tie into the next thing that I want to talk about, but like there is community around areas, but there's also just like a general lack of community. Like it's interesting because when I was playing in Kata, and this is the last time that I remember this fondly, um like I knew specifically people on my server, or I knew like this guy talks in trade chat and does all of this content. If we need him for a raid, he'll probably come do it with us. And this is this guild and all of that. Like you see somebody and you're like, I know that person. And then a sharding happened and everything like that. And I feel like that kind of went away, but that also was like the beginning of the end of the like community server community kind of thing. And I don't necessarily think that's like a bad thing for this game because of the other things that came in with it that I want to talk about next. But I kind of want to get your thoughts on like community, or I guess lack thereof, in the game now.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely had a server identity, right? Like I remember the server I played on in EverQuest like had an identity, and I remember feeling like server pride for Vishan back on EverQuest. Like we had the best guild in the world on our server, and somehow that made us better because we played. Okay, this was the logic of a 16-year-old kid, but like there I struggle whether this is actually a bad thing or not, because I see the sentiment a lot. I see this idea of like you knew, like you had a reputation on your server, and like you knew people, and like people had to stay in line because they would get a bad reputation, and like that's all gone now. And it's like, yeah, I guess so. And it's like, oh, and like you saw someone standing in town and they had like the best weapon, and you're like, oh my god, I have to get that. And it's like, yeah, I mean that was all that, I mean that happened. That was true. Like I'm not calling people liars. I just think we're overvaluing that existence. I like I don't think that in and of itself is why people liked like EverQuest and early Classic. I don't think just the idea of having server reputation or yada 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 was as important as like just this feeling of the feeling of the newness of the world and this exploration,
Mhm.
and like and this like seeing people run through it is a thing that like if you've never played an MMO before, it's just like the coolest thing in the world. Like I can't stress how much like the first time I logged into EverQuest and I was just running around, and my sister, who was the one who got me into the game, like showed up, and she's just there in front of me, and then we're running through and she's like, yeah, those are just other people playing over there. And I was just like, holy shit. And like that is something that every person experiences the first time they play one of these games, because they're just like, I mean, maybe not in 2024 because that the novelty of that's kind of worn off now. But like with these early games, when you're playing them for the first time, for sure, it was like, whoa, I've never seen something like this before. And
Mhm.
so that's, I think, when people think of nostalgia, I think they're, in my opinion, identifying the wrong thing. I think when we talk about community, and maybe I'm just saying this from the perspective of like that, yeah, I knew some people on my server and yada yada yada, but like I was never really big into like the like knowing of people like that. I mean, I had my friends that I made in the guild, and my guild knew people in other guilds, and we talked and raided together at times. Like we built community around that. But like, I don't know. I just think people are overvaluing like the idea of the thing that really pisses me off is like gear used to mean something, and you'd like see a person standing there and be like, oh, now I have my motivation to go get that. And it doesn't even matter that I'll never get it because just the motivation is good enough. And I'm like, you're smoking something, man. Like that's like, yeah, you can look back on it now and think that, but like it's it's better now. It's better now.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely cool to see people in like iconic gear, but also it was sad to be the person in gear that looked ugly as all fucking sin, and you couldn't do anything about it because you just had to wear the things that were on your
Well, and the
character.
game was playing off the fact that like it makes you want to have that gear, and we were too stupid and gullible and believed that we could actually get that stuff, that like it was actually achievable. It's like, yeah, I just got to do this and this and then I'll get it too. It's like, no, you're never gonna get it, sorry, no.
um, so with community, I do want to talk about something else that I think a lot of people overlook when they talk about games. In MMOs specifically, this ties directly back into early World of Warcraft. But I think the number one thing that kind of killed in-game community that was influenced not by the game itself is things like the introduction of voice chat and chat rooms, because then you had people start using those over something like guild chat. And I think that this got even significantly more exacerbated by the fact that you had something come out in Discord where not only was it a voice chat, but it was also a text chat room that you could constantly be interacting with your guild members.
Yeah.
So you had, you had Mumble and TeamSpeak and Ventrilo, and even in the early days, Skype. People use Skype to play the game, believe
Yeah.
it or not. I did that when I was younger. Um, and you had like some chat functionality there, but it was mainly used for voice. And you would do it for raids. In some guilds, you would see people sitting in there and you would chat with them throughout the day or whatever, but you still had things going on in guild chat. I think that guild chats are more or less dead now
Yeah.
because of the introduction of Discord, because of the fact that you can sit in a chat room, you can talk to people, or you can sit there and you can type to people all day long without needing to even be in the game. So why would we even use the in-game system when we're in the game? Because everybody's going to be looking at Discord instead.
Yeah, I think you're 100% correct here. I think the communities still exist in this game. They've just moved outside of the game. I think
Hmm.
that is just true. Like there are class discords for every single class in this game where conversations about the class are constantly going on. There are content creator discords where they're talking about the game and talking about the people that are playing the game and talking about the I mean, there are server, like even in classic WoW, there are server discords where they have the same thing where if someone does something, they're reported to the admins of the server and they put them on a list of bad people. And so you do have a reputation. Like all this stuff exists now. It just doesn't exist within the game itself. And yeah,
Hmm.
this is not any conscious decision that anyone made. It's just kind of the way things went. Like I do remember, I remember I was driving home from work to get home time for a raid night way back in 2010, and I got a flat tire on the way home, and I was going to be late, and I had no way of telling my guild that because the I talked to these people in the game. That's the only place I talked to them when I logged into World of Warcraft, and so there would be times where you would just log into the game, not because you really felt like playing, you didn't really feel like running a dungeon, you didn't really feel like doing anything. Maybe you just wanted to work on some crafting, but mostly you just wanted to chat with people. You just wanted to talk. So you logged in the game and you just talked. Yeah, that doesn't happen anymore because you don't need to go into the game to do that. Like we chat in our Discord all the time,
Hmm.
every day, and so yeah, community still exists. They've just been pushed to the outside of the game. And I like, is that a bad thing? I don't know. I guess like one thing I will say is like the older versions of this game and EverQuest forced you to meet people within the world of the game because you had to, right? And now it's not like this. It's not like World of Warcraft doesn't force you to meet people. I think if you want to do much of anything outside of just like pugging lower level stuff, you do need to eventually meet people. But again, that meeting people interaction happens outside the game. I met you through the guild, but I met the guild through a Reddit post.
Yeah.
And so like I would not have just stumbled upon this guild had I just been playing the game like I did in my early experiences with MMOs. That is another thing that has moved outside of the game. And so yeah, like I think it's wrong to look at the world of Warcraft as it exists right now and say that any single decision or single choice or single system uh, took the idea of community outside of the game. I think it is just a combination of a whole bunch of things. Some of them just the way people approach online gaming in 2024 that has shifted that. It's just the way it is. Like we don't we like in 1999, the internet was still kind of new. Like chatting with people on the internet was still like a new experience that we didn't know, like we weren't used to. Like the first time I went into an AOL chat room, I was like, "Oh, what the fuck is this? This is crazy." And so yeah, that the sheen of that has worn off as well. The way we approach the internet, the way we approach interacting with people is different, and so yeah, the games are going to reflect that. And I don't think that's something you can go back to. Like I think there's nothing anyone can do in any game with any design that is going to magically make 2001 through 2005 return. It's just not going to happen.
Right. Outside of community, though, there are a lot of other outside tools. And some of them are communities around them, but
Hmm.
like things that have fundamentally changed this game in their addition to the ecosystem in which we play the game in now. A few things come to mind. Warcraft logs is one of them.
Sure.
Understanding how good somebody is because of their past raid data. Understanding how good you are, comparing yourself to other people, learning how to be better. Raider.io is another one. This has now been since integrated into the game, but Raider.io still gives you a better sense kind of on what everything is as a whole in a better box. Wowhead, people didn't have, like, you would get magazines and stuff like that to get updates on news, or you would hear from other players. You didn't have a website to go to that was curated like Wowhead is now.
I mean, so
Sure,
there
you
was
had news posts, but it
yeah.
wasn't like curated to the point that it is now. Is what I'm
There
trying to
were
get.
websites and databases, like there was Thoughtbot, and then in EverQuest there was a site called Alakazam that was like collecting data and things like that. So I mean, the websites existed, but an MMO Champion existed in
But yeah.
not early WoW, but came after. So like, I mean, these things existed, but I think you're right. None of it exists in a way that Wowhead exists now for sure.
uh, the other big thing in this, and I think that some people give too much credit to this, and some people don't give enough credit to this, but streamers and YouTube
Oh
videos
yeah.
have fundamentally changed not only the MMO experience, but gaming as an entire whole. Because gone are the days in which you had to learn something on your own by reading. You can watch somebody explain it to you. You can watch 10 people explain it to you. You can watch 20 people explain it to you. And it's always there. And then now that streaming has become so much more popular, you can just always find somebody who is doing what you want to do in the game for the most part, and watch them do it so that you can learn how to do that thing through almost like osmosis rather than actually doing it yourself. And I think that that is streamers and YouTubers have fundamentally changed the gaming landscape. Some will argue it's for the worse, some will argue for the it's for the better. That's not the discussion I want to have, but I think that that has made a critical point in changing how we look at these games.
Oh yeah. No, I think you're right. I completely agree with that. Especially with the idea like you could not see stuff in the game. Like I in EverQuest, like the expansion I was playing, I think this is right before WoW came out. I might be getting my time wrong. Was called Planes of Power, and I knew there are these like end game planes that have all the end game bosses in it, and I could not see them. I did not know what they looked like. I did not know what the experience was like, and like that is this kind of mystical, it creates this feeling in this world of stuff that's a mystery around the corner. You just never know, and that's gone. That doesn't exist anymore. Because in EverQuest, if EverQuest came out today, I just watched some guy run the plane of air raid and like look at what that was like. And like, look, yeah, I think you're right. Having a conversation on is for the worse or for the better is in my opinion a waste of time, because it's here and it's not going anywhere. And so
Mhm.
the games have to shift. Game design has to shift around the reality of YouTube and streaming. It has to, and I think this game has done that, and all games will continue to do that because there's no other option here.
So I left one thing out when we were talking about outside impacts on the game because I want to talk about this in relation to the next thing we're going to talk about, and that's add-ons. Add-ons have gotten progressively more and more and more and more and more powerful in World of Warcraft, and the WoW devs have allowed add-ons to exist. They haven't squashed add-ons. So I think that that's interesting, and it's a design philosophy that other games don't like to go down. They like to
Yeah,
try and find their own in-house solutions for things. Something like a Final Fantasy, for example, is a good example of this. Rather than having a UI add-on, Final Fantasy made this modular UI for Final Fantasy 14, and that was their solution to things like that. Now, they can't provide everything that add-ons can, because when you open source something, it's the same reason why people open source code. You get way more opinions, you get way more contributions. People tailor it to be something that fits their needs, but then that might fit somebody else's need later. And so you just get this like collective of
yeah.
like things that are getting better. And I think that that is something that is very fundamental to WoW specifically. I don't think that there is any other game that does add-ons quite the same as WoW. Things like ESO have add-ons. Obviously, there are damage meters for Final Fantasy, and some other games do have add-ons or things like that as well. But I think that WoW is one of the only MMOs that is like wholeheartedly embraced them, and to the point where both the community and the developers kind of take these things as they just exist now, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think it reflects like where Blizzard came from as a organization, that like, especially always kind of specifically being PC developers. They were always developing for the computer, and like having like the ability to connect and with API and yada yada yada, like into these games to make these add-ons has just been a thing in PC gaming in the 90s and early 2000s, that just like that's what you did. That's just what you did.
Mhm.
And so I'm sure they didn't even really think of it at the time. It was just like, yeah, we're gonna definitely have add-on support. We're like, of course we are. Why would we not? And yeah, like you've opened kind of Pandora's box at that point, and like, yeah, things, developers are brilliant and are just gonna find incredible ways of doing incredible things, to the point where they have uh, had to shoot some stuff down and disable some things, and
Yeah.
now they've got their kind of hidden auras that they're working on, and it is this push and pull. I am of the opinion that like this is good for the game ultimately. I don't. The game can never go to a place where it's just gonna cut that access off. It will never do that. It's been too long. It's too much in the blood of everyone who made the game, and too much in the bones of what the game is, to ever reverse on that. But I do wonder if like in 2024, let's say tomorrow they announce World of Warcraft 2, which they will not do, but let's just pretend that they will, if the game would have as vibrant add-on support as this one did. Because again, this is a place where gaming has changed, expectations on gaming has changed. There are still some games and some companies that are very very open to add-on support, and like it, but I think that's shrinking. A lot more games are not doing that, and not allowing that, and keeping that stuff closed and locked and controlled. So yeah, I mean, I think it's just because this game is 20 years old. It's just the way it is.
Multiple things on what you said. First off, Scott has confirmed World of Warcraft 2 will be announced tomorrow.
Shit.
Everybody mark that on your
Shit.
calendars.
If I'm right,
uh,
I'm gonna look like a genius.
but the other thing too is like you were talking about it as Blizzard coming from creating primarily PC games, and I think that that's a good distinction. I think that that's why this kind of started with World of Warcraft. But that being said, you can have mods and add-ons in consoles now.
Hmm.
Like people like that is not something that is difficult anymore. And so it's interesting to me that when we have these cross-platform games come out now, some of them are allowing some add-ons or modifications to the game now, which is just generally, in my opinion, cool to see. This is as somebody who has a background in programming. Uh, so I definitely like the tinkering and everything around that, but that being said, I think that it opens a can of worms because it's hard to know what's too far until something has already gone too far,
Yeah.
and that creates a problem sometimes.
Yeah,
I
yeah, I agree. It's just, I mean, that's how they have to manage it now. So, I mean, that's at the end of the day, that's what they have to do.
I don't know what to even really say about this. Like, I want to say that for the most part, it's good for the game right now. Um, But yeah, I just don't know where else to go. I think that it is a pivotal thing in what has defined World of Warcraft though over the years. And it's something that will continue to define World of Warcraft is the support that they have for add-ons and external things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would like is the developers not to lose sight on the idea that no, not everyone uses these, and I think they've been steadily getting better with how the game itself communicates information to you. Um, like they've been adding visual effects for abilities that are clearly decipherable and understandable. They've slowly gotten better at this. It's still not like, I just can't imagine playing Mythic Plus without an add-on. Like I just
Hmm.
can't. So like they did this big UI overhaul in Dragonflight, and I'm not saying it's bad. It's not bad. It just doesn't have all the information I want,
Hmm.
and arguably need. And so I think they need to continue to look at ways of iterating and improving the game because, yeah, speaking for new players, not only is the game itself overwhelming, but the expectation for add-ons overwhelming. I will say, like, I do appreciate that through, whether it's, Curse Forge or WoW Up or any of these various platforms, like the ability to install and manage add-ons is so much easier than it was when I played this game 15, 16, 17 years ago. Like just having a thing where you just press a button and it puts it in the folder for you. This is like so nice. Like it was such a
Yeah.
pain in the ass to have to manage that yourself and really daunting. And you almost always didn't do it right and broke something. And so much easier now.
The thing that I wanted to kind of tie add-ons into is over the years we have heard time and time again that XYZ game is going to be a WoW killer. And up until this point, nothing has been. WoW is still going strong and still maintains a relatively strong player base. I think the closest thing that we've ever seen to WoW being killed by another game is when WoW almost killed itself and the great exodus to Final Fantasy happened around the end of Shadowlands. I think that that is kind of the closest we've seen to any game really taking a majority player base away from World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
I want to know why that is because they have outside developers who are starting to create a game now have all of the information on what people like and what people are doing in WoW. And so I find it very weird that taking that formula, copying it, and then modifying things typically ends up being worse than what WoW is. And, I love this game. I don't want it to go anywhere, but it's definitely an interesting discussion to have in that it's everything's on the sleeve, right? Like everybody knows what WoW is, everybody knows WoW systems if you're talking about an MMO player. So it's interesting to me to see things that we've seen in the past with Final Fantasy 14, Final Fantasy 11, New World, Ashes of Creation coming out now, things like WildStar, Elder Scrolls Online. Like there have been multiple hundreds even attempts to kind of dethrone WoW as the primary MMO. and all of them have failed for one reason or another. I don't know if this is just because Blizzard's such a large company and has so many resources, or what it is at this point.
um yeah, this is a complicated question with a complicated answer, I think. I think do not underestimate the the power of laziness and fear of change. Is that it's a lot harder to start over in a new game than it is to continue to play the game you're currently in. Um, but I also think sometimes there are things that are just like kind of greater than the sum of their parts. And I think one interesting thing about World of Warcraft is I think that's just generally true, that like you could take every individual system in WoW and copy it over to a different game, and for some reason it just comes together better in this game than it would in that game over there. Um, I think that's just true. It is kind of fascinating though to think back on the history, and yeah, all these games that were, I think, were decent games. Like I played a little WildStar, a good game that a lot of people got very excited about, and just couldn't have the staying power. I think like one thing I will give Blizzard credit for is I think they are very, very good at responding to threats. They historically have been very good at freely taking something from another game, or recognizing the problem. Like I think that part of what happened in Shadowlands and part of the direction of the game that has gone in Dragonflight and now War Within and beyond is that exodus to Final Fantasy that happened that summer, and them recognizing that problem and making changes to correct it. And I mean, I don't know. I don't have all the numbers memorized, but it seems to have worked. And I think they've been very good at doing that over the course of the entire game. I also just think that, yes, they're a very big company. These games are extremely expensive to produce and run. And there is always going to be a time that while the game is kind of finding its footing and building, that it's losing a lot of money. And very few companies can afford to go through the multi-year development process of an MMO and then
Yep.
the possible multi-year uh, red ink trying to find our footing, and like a game like WildStar was doing okay. People were liking it. They just like ran out of money and they just couldn't keep it going. And that's kind of what we see, like where Blizzard is this kind of monolith that they have so much money. They had these incredibly popular games, these three incredibly popular franchises. They were able to fund World of Warcraft, and I'm sure World of Warcraft didn't make money. I don't like. Did you play on launch? Like that game was a fucking mess, man. Like you couldn't log in. Like you just like just you stuck in the looting animation for 30 minutes. Like it was just a shit show, and I'm sure they lost money on it for a long time before the ship righted itself, and then it became a juggernaut. And companies need to be able to have the patience and the capital in order to do that. And there's very few companies out there that can or will.
So, one of the main things for me in WoW that keeps me playing WoW over every other game is, and this is going to sound so weird to some people, and some people are going to agree with me 100%, but there is no other MMO game that I have ever played, be it action combat or tab targeting, besides maybe WildStar, actually. WildStar, I think, came the closest to this, but that has gotten movement and combat to feel so fluid like World of Warcraft does. I don't know what they do different. I don't know what in their game engine's different. I don't know anything about it. But when I move in WoW, it just feels right. And then when I play like something like I really like Final Fantasy 14, but the movement in Final Fantasy 14 is just, in my opinion, worse than World of Warcraft. In every way, shape, and form, it is just worse to me.
Yep.
I That is something that is huge to me when it comes to thinking about new games that might overtake WoW. And it's something I haven't played Ashes of Creation, but I'm hopeful that the movement and the combat in that game have the fluidity that they have in World of Warcraft.
Yeah, I hope so too. I don't know. I don't know what it is, if it's just like incredibly good code and like just I think the net code for WoW, like once they ironed out their different their struggle at the beginning is just like really good. For example, the Final Fantasy 14 netcode was dog shit, and like it took years. I mean, part of what the whole reboot of that entire game was rebuilding everything from the ground up. And even on that launch, because I played when A Realm Reborn came out, like the ping was just absolutely brutal. Like you just had to live with incredibly high ping. You just adjusted to just living in that world. And so that's part of the feel. And yeah, just like the timing and the feel and the responsiveness of the movement and controls, like this game has just had it down. Even from the very beginning, it's had it down. And I don't know exactly what that is, but I think you're absolutely right. Let me I just like the absolute best possible thing for World of Warcraft is a healthy competition with multiple games. Like if you like WoW and want WoW to be the best game it could possibly be, you want there to be a shit ton of incredibly good MMOs out there, because that can
Mhm.
only be like beneficial for your game. Um, and I mean that is one thing I do kind of worry about, is that like, because the constant question like is the MMO genre dead? Like are these even games that can exist anymore? Um, and I don't know the answer to that question, because like we said, WoW is barely an MMO. Like occasionally you'll see these games like from some of the early creators of the MMO genre that are like, we're gonna go back to our roots and do this and this, and they kind of never they either never come out or they never kind of live up to the expectation of what they want to be or want to create. Like, and so it's like I know Riot's just announced they're putting theirs on hold. Like I don't
Mhm.
know. Like I think there's a lot of very ambitious development in this space, but ambition only gets you so far sometimes. And
Yeah.
there's incredibly expensive games to create and to produce and to run. And I just don't know. I don't know. Like this game is not going to last forever, right? Like it's going this one day the World of Warcraft servers will turn off for the last time. I don't know when that's going to be. It could be 30 years from now, it could be 20 years from now, I don't know, but it's going to happen. And I just like
Yep.
I don't know what fills that space. Who knows?
So here's the one thing that I think is interesting. I- and I'm not, by no means am I an Ashes of Creation like shill, but it is nice to hear that the person who started the project, Steven for Ashes of Creation, started this with the intent of creating a game that he would like to play. Um, and I think that that is true, more or less, because it seems like a lot of the things that are reasons, like minor reasons, but reasons that add up for World of Warcraft being so successful are things that he talks about. The movement, the fluidity in the movement, the combat being so smooth, having the ability to do things that you want to do without restriction. I think that those are things, while all of them in and of themselves are small, add up to be like, this game feels like shit to play versus this game feels good to play. Now, what are the systems after that? Like, you've got to get past the feel part before you can really start to explore further into what the game has to offer, right?
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
kind of my hope, is that Ashes of Creation might actually be able to maybe overcome some of that thing. But again, I don't know that any other game is going to do what WoW can do right now. We haven't seen anything that has proven to do that. And I have extreme skepticism over games like Ashes of Creation or like New World, because they are so ambitious. They are trying to do so many things differently than what is expected. And ambition means complexity, and complexity means long deadlines, and long deadlines means more money. And money at the end of it all is going to be what determines if something can release in the state at which the people developing it want it to release in.
Yeah, I with games like Ashes of Creation, I'm definitely in like I'll believe it when I see it kind of
Yeah,
frame.
exactly.
Like I nothing would make me happier than this game coming out and just nailing everything. But yeah, I'm not. We'll see. We'll see.
Hmm. That being said, we're almost at time here, Scott. But is there anything from WoW that you would like to really see in the future, or maybe even hear in this announcement tomorrow that we haven't talked about? Is there something that if you heard it, you'd be like, yes, thank God, yes?
WoW 2.
so,
No.
so the other question that I have about that though, like, honestly, do you think that a WoW 2 would be better than an improved upon current WoW? More
No.
expansions to improve upon the game.
No, I mean, I think the only thing it would do is it would recapture kind of the magic that everyone feels in classic WoW. Because, I mean, one thing that is definitely true is that the original release of WoW had more space to explore in the world than any expansion ever could. It was
Mhm.
massive, it was enormous, there was tons to explore. The leveling experience was new, and therefore you don't mind that it takes a long time. Like, this was just and like that cannot be repeated unless you release an entirely new game with an entirely new world to explore. That's the only way you can do that. So, but other than that, there's no reason in my mind to do that. Like any kind of WoW 2 would in mind probably just sit in the same service, but just maybe they revamp the engine. Maybe they just do like a complete engine overhaul, but it's still World of Warcraft. It's just how everything on the back end is being processed and worked on, that hopefully, as you said, doesn't lose the feel. Like that's the big thing. We don't want to lose
Yeah.
how the game feels to play. I mean, maybe that would be like what a WoW 2 could be, because they have like it's 20-year-old code that they're constantly having to wrestle with and juggle with. And I will say, like, some of the best developers in the world have solved problems within the code of this game that is pretty remarkable. But there's still a lot of limitations, and a lot of the weird complexity of systems is made because of limitations within the code. Like I think nothing made that more clear to me than how like Warbank or Warband currency transfers are done, which is just like so unfriendly. But like it's honestly just because this is the way they hacked their original code to allow this thing to exist. It's so
Yeah.
wild. I wonder what it actually looks like on the back end, but it just looks terrible from an interface. And if you were building the game up from the ground up that and you wanted that system in it, you would never ever ever build it like that.
Mhm.
So I mean, maybe something like that, but no, I mean, I think the game is in a really good place now overall, despite our complaining, and so I'm not expecting and wouldn't want anything like huge boat rocking to come out of tomorrow. I guess like the thing that would excite me the most is to be surprised, because like that's like one thing that I think Blizzard has always done a really really good job at is like doing something and me being go, wow, I didn't even know I wanted that, and now I have to have it. Um, and so that would be cool to see.
Like a $90 Brutosaur mount.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
What about a permanent Plunderstorm? I feel like that would be a bad idea.
I think it would take away the specialness of it for sure.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't know what I would like to see. I think a WoW 2 or an engine overhaul would probably be one of the biggest things for World of Warcraft specifically. But again, I don't know that that's necessarily better. Like, I would love to see another Blizzard attempt at an MMO because I think they killed it the first time, and I would like to see what their take now would be. But I don't necessarily think that that would be in my best interest as somebody who enjoys playing World of Warcraft, because that means one of these games is going to get more development time, and it might not be the one I enjoy more.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah,
that being said, though, I don't have much else that I wanted to talk about on this main segment. I did want to just say apologies in advance that it isn't really based in news because we haven't gotten the news yet. That comes out tomorrow for
yeah,
us. So hopefully, when we talk a week from today, we will have a lot more to talk about, and a lot more things to go over. But I wanted to take a minute, since it is tomorrow turning 30 for the Warcraft series, to kind of reflect and have an introspective look on what the game used to be, what it is now, why it got there, and not necessarily if that's for the better or worse, but at least kind of, reinform ourselves on why these things happened, because I think that that's a good thing to do every now and again, just so
yeah,
that you can not necessarily bathe yourself in nostalgia, but also not get lost with the nostalgia glasses on and say everything was better before, because let's face it, that's just not true. everything was not always just better before. So
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's very easy to look back 10, 20 years later and be like, I really did love the fact that I had to run 20 minutes from city to city and died 3 times along the way. That really made the world feel dangerous and fun. Like, it's easy to say that now that you're not having to do it anymore. But as a person who did it, it was annoying as shit. I hated it so much. And like, it's fun the first time, and then you don't want to do it again.
Oh, well, I know today was a little bit more off the cuff. It's not based on news and stuff like I said earlier. But I do want to know, what was your most like the best time that you had in an MMO that you think back on? Maybe that's your most nostalgic time. Maybe that's something that you remember the most fondly, in these games. And again, it doesn't have to be in World of Warcraft. Any MMO at all. We would really like to hear about it. So please feel free to contact us at yellingintothevoidwow@gmail.com. YouTube is at Yelling Into the Void Wow, and Twitter is at Into the Void Wow.
And if you are not already subscribed to our podcast, please do so. We want to just make sure that you never miss an episode, especially next week, because we're going to have all the exciting news to talk about, including WoW 2, Hearthstone 3, and the new World of Warcraft Netflix show called The Third War.
What happened to Hearthstone 2?
Oh, they deleted it. They were halfway into it, and they were just like, no.
Oh, all right, guys. Please consider liking, subscribing, and commenting on the YouTube video. That helps us get more views and get exposed to more people. So if you like what we're doing here, please help us out in doing that. We always appreciate it. And again, as always, please leave a comment. I love responding to people in the comments and love hearing what you guys have to say. But until next week, guys, we'll just be over here yelling into the void.